traffic, Topaz 4041 uniform, departing 11 glider and tow.
Since it was the first time I photographed out of the open window of the Cessna, I was very surprised about the wind and the gusts that also affected the camera. But the biggest challenge was actually my pilot could not see the Stämme, which was flying next to us without an engine.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for hanging out with us today. Excited to bring you this very special episode. We've been chatting back and forth with our guest, Toby Barth, and finally nailed down a date and time that we could do this. We are honored and happy to have him take some time out of his busy schedule and talk with us. Toby started flying gliders at the age of 13, and since then he has added an aerobatic license and a rating for motorized aircraft as well. Now, he spends a lot of his time at airfields all over Europe capturing those beautiful and unforgettable shots a lot of you've seen on social media, calendars, and many other places his pictures show up. Toby and I chatted about his love for aviation and photography and what it takes to capture all those amazing shots. Now, don't go anywhere after Toby's story because Sergio The Soaring Master returns for another segment, and this one is titled Flying Old Timers. Now, I do want to thank our Patreon pilots. Thank you for your contributions. And if you'd like to help us out here on the podcast, you can do that as well. Just go to patreon.com/soaringthesky. I'll also put that in the show notes for you. Just Soaring, the makers of the Glider Sim Pro Sailplane Simulator Cockpit, would like to congratulate German pilot Ben Fest for his recent victory in the first ever FAI-sanctioned aviation esports event in history, the Sailplane World Grand Prix, which Ben won after several days of exciting competition against some of the top Condor soaring pilots from around the world. If you are looking for a best-in-class dedicated sailplane simulator cockpit for Condor or Microsoft Flight Sim, look no further than the Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. Check them out at justsoaring.com or at just.soaring on Instagram. Toby, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you today. How are you?
I'm not that bad. How are you? Nice to be in the show.
I'm doing great. Yeah, nice to meet you. Back when I was looking at Instagram, it's been a while now, and I was looking at some of your beautiful pictures, but I didn't realize at first that you were a glider pilot. So can you tell me how your story in aviation got started?
Well, I can do it, of course. So I have to go back a bit further in history because I'm a little bit older. So I grew up in the former GDR at a time when Germany was still divided. And for those who are not so familiar with the history of Germany, that was the former Russian occupied zone due to the division into the Second World War or after the Second World War. It was quite common for people paid by the state to teach children something about the so-called working groups. So I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to learn model flying and especially model building in my hometown, and a good school friend who didn't dare to go alone to the first time or for the first time asked me if I would like to come along with him. I stayed there. He left after half a year. So I learned to build model aeroplanes under supervision of at the age of 8. The person who was in charge at that time probably realized that I had good manual skills. I was very enthusiastic about it. And when the wall come down in 1989, and Germany was reunited, gliding was suddenly allowed for everyone again, and a gliding club was founded in my hometown. This gave me the opportunity to make my first glider start at the age of 12. And since then, I have never let go of the sport. After that, I started the glider training at the age of 13 with a special permit to fly. And when I was 14, I flew alone with for the first time on a Polish Bocian, which is translated as dog. But then I had to wait until I was 17 to get my glider license. Until then, I flew the Polish aircraft of the time, such the Pirat or the Czech Blanik. After I finished my school time, I first thought about becoming a jet pilot with in the German Air Force. Although I passed all the tests from today's perspective, I'm quite glad that I decided against it. I then went to Aachen to train as a light aircraft builder, which was unbelievable fun for me. And I have to say, it was the best decision of my life. And of course, it was the best time of my life till today. So the two bosses I had at the time were glider pilots themselves. So I was in the air some of the time on working days. Then I learned how to maintain, overhaul, repair gliders and small motorized aircrafts, and wooden gliders as well, or wooden motorized aircrafts. The exciting thing was that the job entailed new tasks every day, and then I never did the same thing twice. After or as I really enjoyed my manual work, this gave me an extreme amount of pleasure. For example, we reassembled a flyable aircraft out of a crashed one. From one was the wing, from the second the fuselage, and from the third the engine or the tailplane. And afterwards, of course, we were allowed to fly these planes by ourselves. And other tasks were to repair the wings of wind turbines on the ground, as well as attached in the state and lofty heights. Once again, I was very lucky with the situation that the company where I learned use the same buildings or workshops as the Ackerflieg from Aachen. And since you can actually only be accepted into the Ackerflieg if you are a student, I made a special application for acceptance, even though I was still an apprentice. And I was accepted. But to this day, I had been given the nickname Stift, which is translated pen, which is colloquially for an apprentice in the German-speaking world. I then did a few more licenses, like aerobatic license or glider license, and the license for touring motor gliders or the acrobatic license. After flying the motor gliders in the club, turbocharged G 109B, for a few hours, I acquired the towing license for it, and the club did not have a winch for launching. The gliders could only get into the air by the aerotow. And yeah, the time at the Ackerflieg was incredibly formative for me for an aviation point of view. I came from a wooden glider that still flew in my home club and was then allowed to fly plastic aircrafts for the first time. The first glider I flew to get my towing license was the ASK 21, and 5 starts after the second. Yeah, after the second, the glider was the LS8. This was used for training. Yes, for training.
Wow.
I had to change the aircraft again, and then now flew my third type made of plastics, the ASW 27, on which I
Nice.
almost forget to operate the flaps on the takeoff because I was so flashed during the takeoff. And the fourth type was the Ace H25, which the club had at this time. It was a very good combination of gliders
Yeah.
in the club. Yeah, the German Ackerfliegs did research, build, and fly. Although I was more into flying than a research and building, we had a rule that every member had to work 300 hours a year for the club.
Oh, nice.
which I certainly spent in the air as well because I was more interested in the flying. So I was in the process of becoming a trained light aircraft builder. This was very, very easy for me. And afterwards, as a student at that time, I had obviously no money, and therefore I was not interested in the competitions. Instead, I flew from the first to the last summit, and I didn't think that it was to have to fly a route at the competition that someone else gave me. And I'm still not a flight instructor, but I really enjoyed pathing on my flying know-how, which I still enjoy doing. During this time, for example, I flew 2 times over 900 kilometers. And I finished my time in Aachen with a degree in an aerospace engineering and now working for a subsidiary of a large European aviation company with an A at the beginning. I think everyone knows. The other one beginning with a B. Um, I deal with the question concerning the development of CFRP components from production to repair, recycling of this great material. And just a few days ago, I was the project leader for training course for employees of our parent company on issues such as repair of fiber composite structures and repairs.
So you get to work in aviation as well as play. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very cool job. It's a very good combination between the job and the hobby. And yeah, the airport is approximately 1 kilometer behind the company I work for.
Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah, that's good.
Nice.
Finish the job and go out of the office, and yeah, 5 minutes
Yeah,
later we're on the airfield.
nice. Toby, can you tell us a bit more about the Aquafleets in Germany and, of course, a bit of history and present day roles these groups of engineers play in aviation and sailplanes in Germany and beyond?
Yeah. Of course, of course. So it's definitely an excited question. So I'd be happy to tell you about a little bit about it, although I'm not really well versed in history. But I will briefly try to describe it simply. I think about 1910, aviation was, of course, a very up and coming industry, and many wealthy businessmen were active in the sector at the time, setting up companies to try the luck in aviation. So the First World War threw a spanner in the works, and many of those are active at the time were drafted into military service, and unfortunately, it did not return alive. So after the end of the First War, the operation of powered flight was prohibited in Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. And what was not prohibited was gliding. And so many former employees who had been involved in the aviation before the war got together again. So at the same time, many universe realized that aviation was an emerging industry and offered it as a subject in their buildings. This lead to many student groups, so-called Arca-fleets, which still exists today. And yes, individual Arca-fleets then merged 1951, I think, from the IDEF-Flieg, so Interessengemeinschaft Deutscher Akademischer Fliegergruppen, or IDA-Flieg in short, which still exists today. IDA-Flieg is so-called an umbrella organization for the individual ACA-fleets. Its history role in the development of gliding is truly unique in the world, of course, and very important and groundbreaking developments for the gliding came out of other ACA-fleets, I think. For example, the world's first fiber composite glider was built and flown in the ACA-fleet. in my opinion, was the FS-24 Phoenix, so I remember correctly. And also important manufacturers and like a DG or Aviation or Alexander Schleicher or Roland Schneider emerged from members of Ackerfleets. And many other developments, such as winglets, were investigated, but also ideas that proved not to be useful were finally important for gliders or gliding. Due to the price increase in glider development, in my opinion, the importance of development is no longer so great today. And I know that I will certainly receive negative criticism for this opinion, but it's my own opinion. Rather, the importance today is slightly different. Today, it's more the training of aeronautical engineers and hands-on material, like sticking their fingers in the resin pot and building constructions and calculating aircraft, and less the groundbreaking new developments which we saw in the history of the Acker fleets. And the Acker Fleet or Eder Fleet, in cooperation with the German Aerospace Center, which is DLR in short, is known worldwide for the flight performance measurement of current gliders or older gliders as well. And at the EDA Fleet summer meeting, which takes place every year, the gliders are measured and the polars are given by the manufacturers of the gliders when they are checked for the accuracy and new measurement procedures are valid. So years ago, I was allowed to accompany two of these measurement flights, which starts exactly at sunrise to be towed to flight level 95, which is quite high. And there the measurement flight starts between the so-called holy discus and the glider to be measured.
Oh, wow. Nice. Aerox, the #1 in portable and engineered aviation oxygen systems, your source for FAA-approved oxygen mask and portable oxygen systems, and now introducing the Aerox Pro 2 Plus Flight Bag portable oxygen system. Small, lightweight, and simple to use, the Pro 2 Plus is perfect for the occasional user who wants the flexibility to access higher altitudes without worry about flying impaired. Now available at Aerox distributors and at Aerox.com. So remember, our friends at Aerox, engineered for aviators. Toby, was there ever anything along the way when you were with the other engineers designing or refining sailplanes or aircraft that on paper looked like a breakthrough concept, but then in practice and prototyping just really failed to live up to the concept? I mean, surely
Yeah,
there were some
I know.
concepts that you guys worked on that were interesting, but just didn't come out when you tried to execute them.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. In my Acker fleet, we had such the idea or project which was cancelled years later. Yeah, these development exists, and I even worked for the development by myself. And it was a so-called FVA-27, a glider in duck plane configuration. This means that the canard, the horizontal stabilizer, that does not sit at the rear of the tail plane, but in the front of the main wing. The special thing about it that the tail plane always have to produce a downforce when it sits on the rear of the tail boom in order to compensate the moment of the main wing. And in the duck plane, this is so that the wing produces lift instead of downforce to produce the same moment. And overall, this improves a drag of the whole aircraft. So this concept on which I myself worked and investigated many hours of work, unfortunately, it turned out to be too complex, too difficult to implement, and later on too cost intensive. Due to the long duration of the project, the technical development of the airfoils, and this concept became outdated and was discontinued. a few years after my active time as a student.
Toby, being both a tow pilot and a glider pilot, once you had had a chance to do both, and after you had done many glider tows, when you got back in the cockpit of your glider and someone else was towing, were there things, even little details, that you might have started to do differently after being on the other side of the rope? Did being a tow pilot change your perspective at all from being on the glider side?
Yeah, definitely it changed my perspective. Yeah, definitely. So before I came a tow pilot by myself, the pilot in the tow plane was always the one who made the right decision for me. Yeah? And I trusted him blindly, and it was convinced that he would make the right decision if any problem arose. So then, when I had done this auto rating by myself, I suddenly felt totally insecure because I actually believed that anyone else I was towing would take the same about me, that I would always make the right decision if a problem arose, such a rope break or an engine failure or something else. That had a great impact on me personally, and actually put me under a lot of pressure because I'm basically a perfectionist and always try to make the best decision. And yes, that really cost me a lot of sweat. Those first tows I did there, and they made even more difficult by the fact that I did my towing license on an airfield on a very smooth 1,000 meters runway, even flat runway in France. And after I had done the rating, I had to wait a month until the rating was registered in my license. And when I had this license, I did my first aerotow with my license. The runway in Germany was only 600 meters long, which is more or less half the distance.
Wow.
And I died
Uh,
1,000 deaths and sweated off out what I felt like 10 liters of water in the few seconds of the tow. and, all, and although I know
yeah.
exactly that the glider was capable to towing, that the tow glider was capable to tow the glider into the air on the short runway. And yes, you really have to do completely different perspective on responsibility you have as an aerotow pilot in front, and still have that today. And I no longer see it as unimpeachably correct opinion, because there is only a person sitting in the front of the tow plane. So yes, being a tow pilot changed my perspective of the guy in front of a glider, definitely.
So let's talk about your 1,000 kilometer almost flights. Sounds like you had sounds like you had two of them back to back recently. How about take the listeners through one of those flights, or maybe just what stuck out the most out of both of those flights? I mean, 1,000 kilometer flights, they're a massive achievement anywhere in the world, but some places are harder than others
Yeah,
due to weather, terrain, cloud base.
yeah.
We'd love to hear about one of these.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I can do it with a pleasure. So, unlike you expect, the flight is not only done in recent past, but it's already a little bit longer in the past, a little bit longer back. So, I think that's about 15 years ago, and actually, exactly these flights are also a reason why I got today less on kilometers hunt than I on hunt for beautiful moment that I try to capture photographically. But back to the question, I was a student in the Ackerfleet and had the opportunity to fly an aircraft that I could fly as an age 25. This was an aircraft of a professor. He was a friend of mine, and had the key for and they had the key for the trailer. And the area around Aachen is actually relatively good for soaring and flying. For the large flights, that's quite cool. and you can take off relatively early. So the cloud base and the cumulus thermic is also fine in this area, unlike the northern Germany area where I live today. There are also artifactual thermals in form of coal fire power plants. They make it possible to extend flight a little bit after the end of the thermal, because you can still fly there after the sun reaching the horizon. What I remember to this day, it was we took off too late on both flights. So we underestimated the height of the first cumulus clouds of the day. Were in the air about half, 3/4 of an hour too late. Well, we learned from that. Both flights just missed the 1,000-kilometer mark. Once it was 936 kilometers, and the day after it was 940 kilometers, and not the 1,000-kilometer mark. I really flew on 2 consecutive days on almost 12 hours each, and between the landing of the first flight and then start of the second flight, there were only a little less than 12 hours. And what I still remember is that we flew into France, which is no longer possible due to some military airspaces today. And on the way, there was a large power plant, and the exhaust fumes were unbelievably good, rising over 6 meters per second. But its smells was so chemical, and that I feel sick to my stomach every time. That was not good. And yes, I actually can't remember so many other things except marking the 1,000 kilometers, because we hit weather limits twice, and so the weather was not good enough to make such big flights on these both days. We had to give up on both days the plan to turn around early, and in the evening we extended the flights a bit with the artifactual thermals from the cold fire power plants. But we could not fly such long distance with the maximum possible 5 turn points. So who of the listeners does not know the areas so well now? The flying areas was low mountains ranges where we flew, and not mountains like the southern Germany. The maximum base altitudes we had on these days were, I think, 2,200 meters, which was okay, but not really good. But with large spreads of overdevelopment cumulus clouds. What I can still remember was that on the second flight, I actually had a relatively strong hangover around noon, where I could not do anything at all. I could hardly do any more thermaling, circling, or the speed. So tired I was. And after the landing, I and my team partner were a bit sad because we didn't make the 1,000-kilometer mark. But it was clear, should the next days good weather, flying weather again, we both will certainly not sit in the plane, but sleep until noon. Yeah. That was my remembering at these 2 flights.
Right. So close.
Yeah, so close.
But good flights.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Good flights, and flights to remember.
Toby, I wanted to transition now into what most listeners probably know you for, and that's photography. Countless glider pilots follow you on your social media platforms, and you do also sell your pictures on your website. But how about tell us briefly how you got into photography to begin with, And what led you specifically into aviation and sailplane photography?
Okay, yeah. That's somewhat a longer story. What I would like to do is explain it to you and to the listeners. As a student, I never had the money for a decent camera, something like a DSLR, but the topic has always interested me. So I started taking pictures with my small Pentax compact camera, but these results were not very impressive. I then meet my wife in I have to count 2011, and she was really taking pictures, really good pictures with the Nikon DSLR, and the pictures were much, 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 much better than mine. So I bought my own relatively tricky. It was a Nikon D90. It was a used camera for approximately 250 euros with a lens, with the interchangeable lens, and then started to take pictures, walking attempts, and learn to use the camera. And I was incredibly bad and bad photographer. And my wife is even faster today to recognize and select a good subject. In I think 2013, we flew together to Africa, South Africa, and made a month-long wild camping tour through Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And there we had then, for example, in the Kalahari for the or the Okavango Delta overnight in a tent. And we photographed a lot of nature, wildness, and a lot of course, wild animals.
Wow.
And
nice.
yes, that was actually the starter for me to begin a deal more with photography. And yeah, however, my pictures were significantly worse than those of my wife's, although we had the same camera, the Nikon D90. And at the first, it was hard for me to realize that this was not due to the camera, but due to the photographer, means due to me. But I had a very good teacher. During this time, I also took photography classes to learn even more about taking pictures. So I just started photographing everything like starry skies, landscapes, animals, insects, planes, people, just really everything. With this picture, I created an account on Flickr to have a kind of showcase for the picture to took in some way. That went quite well. So I got there relatively quickly positive comments, which then made me a bit proud, of course. I realized quite quickly that okay, can photography many things okay, but nothing really good. So then I realized that I could be quite useful to focus on a little and find a niche. At this time, I took pictures on the ground and the airplanes on the runway during the sunset, and I tried to make a little artistically valuable pictures. At that time, still together with my wife, and that it was a really great time to do it together with her. We had a lot of fun, and it was great to look at the results on the computer and just have those moments. I then even took pictures at competitions as soon I wasn't or in the plane. I wasn't flying, and I think 2 years later, in 2015, I think I got a call from the publisher of the photo calendar in spring of February, and I might have to go back in history for a short moment. The original photographer, Klaus-Dieter Zink, had unfortunately passed away in 2010, and the rights to the pictures were taken over by the calendar publisher. And she had been looking for someone who could take pictures in a relatively high quality of sailplanes for a long time, and not the same picture that you see every time on in every social media platform. And after a long research on the internet, she found me through my pictures on Flickr, to my Flickr account. And the first phone call was actually over an hour. And when then agreed that I could publish 1 or 2 images in the upcoming edition of the glider photo calendar for a very small fee. So I was incredibly proud, especially since I had never explicitly worked towards getting some money for my pictures. Less than a month later, the flying season started in Europe again. So precisely in the French Alps. And I immediately started taking pictures in flight and found out that it was not that easy that I had originally thought. And I had met Klaus-Dieter Zink in France and often talked with him in the evening over a good glass of red wine about flying, but never about photography. And I only saw his glider from a distance, and unfortunately, I never saw photography technology he used in the plane. And from today's perspective, it's of course a bit of pity, but perhaps also a good thing, so that I had to learn to go completely my own way in the photography. And then, my first ways were not very successful, although I had some good pictures. I think out of approximately 500 pictures I took per flight, only 10, uh, 10 pictures showed an airplane, but the wing was cut off and the horizon was not leveled. And for every 1,000 pictures, I think there was about 1 really good pictures I like personally. Until today, I have invested approximately, let me count it together, 15,000. I think 15,000 euros in photo equipment, and I sold the most of it again, only to find out what was the most useful equipment for me and my way of photography. And at the end of 2021 or 2021, the season, I had more than 53,000 pictures of gliders on my hard disk. More than 90 of them are aerial photographies of gliders in flight, means in air-to-air pictures of gliders.
Wow, nice. Our longtime sponsor of the show, the Soaring Academy, is engaged in nonprofit outreach work with local area veterans and also with young people for the STEM programs at their top-notch gliderport facility just outside of Los Angeles, nestled near the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. They also have a fantastic flight school and are continuing to turn out great glider pilots every month. If you like to donate to their nonprofit initiatives or learn more about their flight school, go to soaringacademy.org or check them out on Instagram at Soaring Academy. What is the hardest part about executing a good aerial photograph, maybe of a glider or another airplane, that maybe most people wouldn't think about? I guess many people think, hey, what's so hard about that? You just point your camera out the window, click a few times.
Yeah.
How about take us through what the hardest thing, whether equipment or technique, that took you the longest to master?
Oh, wow, that's a really, really interesting question to me. I get the following question quite often. I want to take pictures like you. Which camera should I buy? And when I read such question on Facebook or Instagram, I think you can use the same camera, but you won't get the same picture. And it's like a chief in a restaurant. If the food tasted good, no one ever get the idea that it was because of the particular high pots and pans. But exactly this comparison is true. I have to absolutely master the equipment, but also know the receipt of the picture. In other words, understand the spices and the ingredient and their effect. So come back to your question. I think the most difficult thing is by far not the camera setting, but the way to take good pictures. For me personally, the picture is first created in my head. I plan the position of the sun, the position of the airplane in the picture, and the background relatively precisely, and then fly to that exact spot for the desired photo. So the most difficult thing for me was to learn what I had to do to take exactly my target photo. For example, I'm in a very close radio contact with the pilot of the other glider and give him precise instruction on how to fly. Of course, ideally, we have already discussed this on the ground, such a pre-flight briefing, and can take up to, and this can take up to 30 minutes, especially if the flight area is still unknown for me. And when I think back, it's exactly what makes the difference. It was the most difficult thing for me to learn. And over the time, I have developed, I think, my own style in the pictures. Um, I think the image itself is highly determined by the lens I use and not by the camera. But nobody wanted to know about it until now. So I shoot a relatively wide angle to get more of the great landscapes into the picture. That means that the other glider has to fly very, very close to me. Usually it is a wingspan distance, between I think between 15 and 25 meters. What really was difficult for me was to learn how to fly and photograph at the same time without losing the safety. It's so stressful for me that I can only do it for maximum 15 minutes at a time, and then I need little break in the air or on the ground, and I can't process more in my head at the same time. Yeah. When I think about it now, more and more factors come into my mind. An additional one is a time pressure. It sounds a bit unusual at the first time, but let me explain a bit. Um, Many of my pictures are taken in place where there are no lifts at the time of the photo. For example, at sunrise or sunset or over the open sea. And at the moment the glider releases a tow rope, there are about 10 minutes left for all the photos, depending on the reached altitude and the distance to the landing point or the safety field. And the clock counts down and creates for me a very high stress level. Often there is also a high noise level at the open window. Sometimes I fly as a co-pilot with the disassembled door, and my half upper body is hanging out of the plane in the wind. Blindly operating the camera with thick gloves is simply a part of the job, and there is simply no time to search for the right camera settings.
If you had to choose one single moment, one single picture as an epitaph, and a crowning achievement of your career, which would it be?
Wow. Oh, again, what a tough question. I think uh, I think is that always consider the images that are the more recent are my best images. So maybe because I'm still very emotionally attached to the planning of the image and the effort behind it. But highlights, have a few. So let me pick up two, please, not only one. The first was a planned photo flight over a nature reserve with the brand new Stemme S12. So for this, I had arranged a meet of the Stemme factory pilot in Pookshof, south of Rostock, on the Baltic Sea. It is in the northeastern part of Germany. And I myself flew with Stennis in a Cessna 172, which with a retractable landing gear. So it's an hour and a half to this decision airfield, and the weather was only very moderate, and the destination airfield we had to land directly because the weather absolutely did not allow another minute in the air. So the pressure on me was particularly high since this time no glider pilot colleague from my own club flew the photo model, but a company was behind it, which sent not only the factory pilot but also their newest flagship to me. So the weather was like the first still very questionable, but improved in quite good as predicted. And I had been in planning the days for about half a year. That made me additionally nervous. And after the Stämme finally landed on the airfield, the marketing boss of Stämme was the co-pilot. So now the pressure was even higher on me. And we made a very detailed briefing, and I had one eye on the clock because the time was running for the photos. And then a short time later, together we had arranged over the island Dars. Since it was the first time I photographed out of the open window of the Cessna, I was very surprised about the wind and the gusts that also affected the camera. But the biggest challenge was actually my pilot could not see the Stämme, which was flying next to us without an engine. So I had to more or less remote control my pilot at the same time and tell him whether he should climb or think at the same time, at the same position. The pilot of the Stämme, of course, shoot, and I, of course, shoot actually together the photo. We restarted the engine of this Stämme in total 3 times to regain altitude and flew along the really great looking coast of the Baltic Sea to get a different view of the landscape again and again. So at the end, there were really unique pictures in the box and in the camera, of course. And we landed not only this one landed not only in the photo calendar, but also in the calendar of the company Stämme. So I was yes, I was a bit proud of it. And the second flight was not less exciting for me. I always want to have a beautiful landscape in background of my pictures. This is in northern Germany, partly not that easy because it looks apart from the coast of the North Sea and the Baltic Sea in the interior relatively uniform. So to say monotonously. Here, sunrise and sunset offer themselves because the landscapes is then completely different in colors, and the light draws attentionally to completely different things than during the day. After I have photographed some sunsets in the recent years, I wanted to photograph at sunrises to know whether the lights moods is perhaps even better. So I then tried to choose a suitable day for the morning haze that occurs on our region in autumn by means of a good weather forecast. The great thing is that this haze is stationary for the ground, and there is no wind blowing, and it's only a few meter thick. For the selected day, I asked my colleague Torben if he would like to go do a sunrise flies with the brand new Mini Lac with the front electrical sustainer. And he knows my photos and was immediately on board. I drove to the airfield well before sunrise and pushed the club motor glider out of the hangar and stored my photo equipment in the cockpit. Approximately 15 minutes before sunrise, I took off to meet the Minilac with the electric motor in the front in the neighbored airfield at exactly the right moment. Yeah, the exciting thing about this that only after takeoff and with the onset of the dawn, you can tell whether the day is worth or not because it's still dark just beforehand. And this makes the sunset compared to the sunrise many times more exciting to photograph. Well, what I can say, I had interpreted the weather maps correctly. And in addition, there was some luck, of course. The morning haze was unbelievably great to look at. And it's almost hard for me to find the words for this. And yeah, due to the FES drive, we had no stress this time after he released the tow rope, and we stayed at an altitude of about 1,000 feet and captured many unique pictures on the memory card during the 30 minutes of flight. And yeah, after the battery of the Mini-Lug was empty, I watched the safe landing of the glider and stayed a bit above the photo spot because it was so beautiful to fly straight back. And after I landed again, I must have smiled and beamed it to the whole day. So happy and proud I was about the successful photo flight. And I also think that in the coming years, photos from this flight will always end in my calendar. Yeah, the first of the series can be seen in August of the 22 edition, means this year edition. They're even with the River Elbe flowing in the direction of the mega city Hamburg. I could actually tell of many more flights of this kind, but I have already told with the second flight more than the actual question was. Yeah, however, I would like to tell one thing again because it comes into my head just now. My focus is definitely on photos and especially with this flight, but also many other. I'm really sad not to be able to film at the same time. I'm already nervous enough before the flight and just can't imagine to install additional cameras alone speak something meaningful into the camera. Let's see if modern technology might change this in the upcoming years. Maybe we see something in the years in the future.
Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America, and they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. They are also now the exclusive distributor in North America for the new Just Soaring Sim Pro. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes, staffed by Adam, Kelly, Julie, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com. You know, I was looking at a lot of your photos today, actually, and
really?
Some of my
Good.
favorites are the sunrise and sunsets that you were just talking about.
Yeah. These are really unique. Yeah.
They are stunning pictures. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I really like the sunrises because the light is more special than the sunsets. I can't describe it, and you just smile through the whole day when you have a sunrise flight. The sunrise flight had everything their own spirit, I think.
That's interesting that the two are different as far as the lighting. You know.
Yes, because of the haze. Because in the morning the haze is on the ground. It's only on the ground, and in this second, when the sun comes up, the earth gets warmer, so the haze will be not there anymore. And when it's there, it's dusty. It's more moisture in the air, and in the morning you have the haze in a very thin area above the ground, and in the evening you have it up to 1,000 meters.
Right.
So
Nice.
due to the convection and the thermal activities, so the sunrise it's more special than the sunset. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Wow. Now this is a kind of random question, Toby, but have you ever gotten a chance to fly any vintage gliders?
Yeah.
And if you have, what types and which were your favorites? Which ones made you maybe not so comfortable in the cockpit, or flight characteristics? Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. The first question to relax a bit. So, of course, I fly a glass wing mosquito. That's a year older than I am. That's definitely an older time at over 40 years, right? But I don't think that was you meet with the question. The real old timers I would like call a Gruner baby and the prototype of the D 37 Artemis, I think, from the Akaflieg Darmstadt. One of the two designers was Wilhelm Dirks, one of the founders of DG Aviation. I think the year of construction of the D37 was in 1967. Unfortunately, I don't remember for the Grunau baby. So the Grunau baby was just a fun machine. I had flown the SH-25 on the same day. So it was a total change between planes, but it was totally easily and intuitive to fly, especially since I had flown many Polish made wooden planes in my early years. Yeah, more pleasant was the unpleasant was the 37, but I don't remember the details. It was years in the past. I think it was the general handling and the rudder tuning. And another old times come to my mind. It was what the glass wing or Glasflügel in German 604. It was a serial number 9, built in 1971. For those who don't know the details, it was the open class airplane from Glasflügel or glass wing with a wingspan of 22 meters, which was developed from the 70-meter Kestrel and already manufactured in 1970, I think, with a glide ratio of almost 50. Plane was very easy to fly, but in the air, but especially the landing demand everything from me. So the ergonomics and the arrangement of the very numerous levers in the cockpit, among other things, by 2 levers for the flaps and 2 further for the brake. So good, and not be compared with today's standard. So especially since the air brakes were extremely bad. Myra remembers flying some old timers.
In terms of your own sailplane gliding experiences, can you give us maybe one or two particular flights that really stick out in your mind, and maybe take us through those flights and what you gained or learned from?
I remember one flight in particular. It was in the French Alps in a very snowy spring, I think 7 years ago approximately. We took off after sunrise, just after sunrise, and were lucky enough to find a quite strong wave. And when then made quite good progress, we flew into the higher mountains to the north, and there we had an upward criteria at 3,700 meters. Below this altitude, we wanted to fly back, and above this altitude, the idea was to look for the updrafts. Already at 3,900 meters, we noticed that there was only a strong sinking, and we flew away from this area, a huge downdraft there. And I was flying with 2 other pilots during this flight, and we unfortunately lost each other and no longer had visual contact together. And then I had to fly to back home alone against the sun, which was not yet too high on the horizon, directly from the front. And I was then looking at the very snowy landscape without contrasts, and was flying at the ground speed of approximately 200 kilometers per hour. So we had a strong wind in this higher altitude there. And the sink rate increased, and I had to decide which of the 2 valleys to use for the further flight. I knew that one valley was not landable, and only one valley would take me home. So I was traveling in an unfamiliar DG400 aircraft that I had just bought with a friend some month before. In a moving map was not installed in the glider, and I was very stressed because of the high sink rate of approximately 10 meters per second. It was very unusual was the position of the sun, because it was in a different place, because it was is still very early in the day, so I didn't know exactly in which valley I have to fly into. And then I flew very low to the ground and found a ridge, which I found upwinds there over snow-covered mountains. Yeah, and then however, I was really scared because the terrain in this area is definitely not landable. I made it back home, but I was so stressed after the flight. I didn't fly the next day. Well, what can we learn from this? You have to be 100% prepared in the aircraft, and not like me flying without the moving map and in an aircraft that you didn't trust 100% yet. So a long story short, be prepared all the time.
Absolutely. Toby, we always like to talk safety, of course, here on the show. One thing we see a lot of in social media, people are trying to mimic the cool stuff that you're doing with close proximity, the air-to-air pics of other gliders. Can you please talk to the community about the risk of this type of photography and what can go wrong and what they should pay attention to? We can, of course, suggest that people just don't do it, but the reality is when people see cool work like yours, then, of course, they're going to want to stick the GoPro or an iPhone out the side window in their cockpit and get a picture of their gliding buddy. You know how that works, but can you talk about that?
I think it's really good that you are bringing this up. I see this from 2 points of view. Let's first talk about YouTube and other other social medias. I personally find the situation really worrying. On the one hand, everyone who has an account there wants to have more followers and gets likes for what they upload online. Unfortunately, behind these portals are companies that want to make a profit with every post. And this leads to the fact that particularly daring looking title pictures or descriptions on YouTube are clicked more often than others. And the algorithm behind reacts to this and shows this post more often than others. Uh, This leads to dull, perhaps somewhat bumpy landings being described as if the plane were a total loss afterwards, just to get more clicks, to name just one harmless example. Videos of obviously risky maneuvers are not deleted either, but rather serve the user to get even more followers, as the video is often shown to users through many comments. In my view, this is a spiral from which is difficult to escape. Um, yeah, I also consider the argument that other pilots could benefit from their own mistakes to be partly an excuse. But of course, on the other hand, I have to look at my own nose. If I relate it to my online portals, then I can say that I take photos for aviation customers and, above all, for the gliding calendar that is available worldwide, and not for Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Everything I show there was taken besides and not especially for these portals. But let me back come to your question. Especially in my case, only my pilot, the glider pilot, and I know how exactly I take these pictures. In this way, I want to prevent inexperienced pilots from putting themselves into a dangerous situation, even though I have been asked several times for video. And to keep the risk as low as possible, I conduct, of course, like I said previously, a pre-flight briefing and a de-flight briefing. In this, we clarified the understanding of the roles, who flies where, which maneuvers will we fly, in which order, which speed we fly, and which frequency we are, and what are the upward criteria for the flight. And there have also been flights where I have only noticed in the air that the model is not able to control his own aircraft. I aborted these flights and land again. And whenever it's possible, I fly alone during my photo shoots, and I photograph and then fly at the same time. I have done this on about half of my flights until now, and during the last year, and have especially adapted equipment to do exactly this. And to come to an end and to the final note, do not do anything stupid just for a cool picture.
Toby, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. It's been so much fun chatting with you. I know the listeners are definitely going to enjoy this.
Yeah, thanks also from my side, and hopefully the listeners have a good time with this podcast.
Hi everyone, Sergio from Soaring Master here, with tips and advice about soaring and cross-country flying. Old sailplane types are not only good looking, well, there are some exceptions, but also very interesting to fly. Designed in a different era, with different materials and performance, older sailplane types are a flyable time machine. Their handling and performance are a testimony of other times. But apart from the fun of flying these machines, is there any value for a modern pilot performing a local flight with an old-timer? And the answer is a big yes, for two main reasons. The first is that by flying different aircraft with different handling characteristics, we take our brains out from the comfort zone. It will have to quickly learn how much force and response you get during all flight phases. After this experience, when you go back flying a modern type, your skills will be much sharper than before. We call this aircraft handling detachment, and this is used in flight test schools to enable test pilots to evaluate the aircraft response during a certain task in an unbiased way. So during a typical flight test course, you get to fly 2 or 3 completely different aircraft in a single day. For instance, an aerobatic aircraft, a general aviation and a fighter, or a sailplane. And we perform the same evaluations with them. This improves the ability to assess the aircraft against the desired task. We fly the task and we evaluate the aircraft. This brain exercise is great, and that's why test pilots are praised for their airmanship, because they are used to quickly get the aircraft. They are always working on a higher sensorial mechanical frequency. Do the same by flying as many different types you can, and making your brain quickly get new handling from different sailplane types. The second reason for flying old-timers is that most of the flights carried out with them are local flights, without any other objective but to stay aloft, tumbling or ridge flying without any pressure or time constraints. So you can practice different techniques and explore phenomena to your heart's content. It's pure joy, and we all dedicate more strongly to a task that brings peace of mind and pleasure. So whenever you can, go fly an old-timer. I wish you all happy flying. For more tips, follow me on Instagram @SoaringMaster or check my website, soaringmaster.com.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton, co-producer Mitch Thompson. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.